Caitlin, welcome to our podcast. I'm so excited to have you today.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. This is going to be great.
This is our first time getting you on. And so tell everyone a little bit. I did our intro, but tell us everyone about you. Tell them about frugal nutrition, how it came about, because I think it's a really cool concept that you started. And
Oh, thank you.
An off right now to me.
Oh, I appreciate that. So it's interesting, I was always sort of confused when I was younger about the idea of like eating healthy being so expensive. And I think that's because I grew up in a place where we didn't have those quote healthy food options. And it was just, you were just eating food that was, made from ingredients, right? And so I remember I think this was in 2012 or 2013, we had been traveling all around and we had seen how other cultures were eating. And it really was just from the ingredients. And so I thought, I wonder if people really need some help here and need to really see that there's a way to eat well with, out breaking the bank, I guess, so to speak. So that's kind of how things got started. We lived in Peru at the time and I started frugal nutrition and I had no idea what I was doing. And I was like really self-conscious and embarrassed all the time and so embarrassed trying to take pictures. And I had, so it took a little while to get it off the ground. But now I've been doing it for 8-9 years at this point, and I've taken breaks when I just was too busy with my other work situations. But yeah, so that's kind of how I got started. I just felt that maybe I could help fill this need for people who wanted to learn how to cook well without it being really expensive. And then I went to get my master's in nutrition eventually and became a nutritionist. And so now I have a stronger background in that side of things. And things work pretty well together right now. So
That actually prefaced your nutrition degree. I didn't know that.
yeah, a lot of people think that I also rebranded and did some things. So it kind of became much more popular after I was already in the nutrition field. But yeah, I did have it for a while, just alongside whatever other work I was doing.
Yeah, I think I think it's interesting because food can be expensive, right? And I do think I notice this in my practice. I notice this with everyone I encounter basically is sometimes we assume, first of all, that people know how to cook. They know how to put meals together that make sense, that are helpful. Even when a patient comes to me, I draw in a lot of people that are eating super well, like half the time they're eating better than me and they're doing great. But then sometimes I realize I'm not diving deep enough and I start to, and I'm like, this isn't balanced. This is, there's too many processed things, what have you. Or there's foods that are sort of seem unattainable to individuals, right? So I do think the functional world to a degree pushes a lot of foods that might seem unattainable to a person.
Yeah.
And some of that's true, but what's your knowledge base or your recommendations based on foods that might seem right, like ritzy or expensive or anything, and the actual affordability of them?
Yeah. So I think that we sort of get lost in, I don't know, maybe the modern capitalism of it or something where we're like, oh, well, we're or the American idea of we're going to compress this into the most manageable thing. And we're going to say oh, what's the most nutritious option? And I'm just going to eat that. And I'm not going to look at anything else. And it's I'm going to eat goji berries every day. And then I'm good. I don't have to worry about it. And that's sort of this mentality that we have in the States sometimes, if that makes sense, always go, 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 and sort of more competitive. And we're just give it to me in a pill and then I can move on with my life. We've really lost our connection to food and culture in a lot of ways. And so, that's why you see a lot of people who are oh, I eat perfectly throughout the week and then I splurge on the weekends. I eat this way so that I can afford to eat this way on the weekends. And we have a hard time embracing moderation and finding that balance. And so I try to talk about that sometimes where it's you don't have to have whatever the next big thing is. You just want to eat lots of different plants, basically, all the time, and make sure you're getting a really varied diet as often as you can. And try not to look at everything as in such an all or nothing mentality where it's either I'm going to eat perfectly or I might as well just eat sugar and donuts all day long.
We do have a majority of people, and I do that too sometimes. You know what I mean? It's just sort of
Yeah.
hard to break. Feel like, especially as females in the American culture, sadly. And so, what would you advise someone who maybe, let's say, they follow one of the like big wigs of the functional world, which all of us are doing that are into functional medicine, and they're telling us to eat some, I don't know, like fruit or vegetable or thing that is not, they feel like they cannot be healthy without that, right? Isn't that a concept you
Mhm.
see a lot? Like, can't be healthy without tiger nut. And it's like, what the heck is tiger nut? You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
how am I supposed to find tiger nut? What am I supposed to do with tiger nut? Do you have people that come to you at all asking about that?
Absolutely. I think that's such a good question because it does happen.
But it felt like a good example.
Yeah. I feel like that does happen. And, maybe it used to be quinoa back in the day, and then it was kale, and now it's these things that are even more sort of seemingly exotic or harder to reach. And I think in some cases, if you really want to acquire those things, you can make it happen. There are ways to find things cheaper online in bulk, what have you. But realistically, I mean, I certainly don't believe that everyone needs to eat tiger nuts in order to function as a healthy human being. And so I mean, this, I'm sure with the people you work with, there's such a mindset and behavioral piece to all of this where it's like what you're seeing is just distilled down into a soundbite. And we need to look at the context of the entire diet and the entire intake. So just like we say with like if you're following a specific diet, like if you're vegan, you're quote automatically healthy. Well, that's not true. That's same with any diet that you follow. It doesn't make you automatically healthy just because you're following this label. It's really the context and the full makeup of what you're consuming and just generally being exposed to for your gut microbiome and all that. So, if somebody was going to say that, I try to kind of explain that's not really how it works. And I would encourage them to kind of maybe look at what their local options are that are more affordable. If corn is affordable to you, then guess what? That's going to be the best vegetable for you to choose, possibly, vegetable slash grain to choose.
I don't think we emphasize enough that what you're saying is like partially is shopping local, right? Like what is of season to you, what is local at a farmer's market or what have you. It could be like the corner mart, I don't care. But a lot of people speak out what they're hearing about, but they don't realize like that might not be the healthiest choice, just even based on how it's being grown, right? Affordability, availability, all of that.
Oh my gosh, it's so true. I mean, I look, I will go buy a clamshell of organic arugula from the grocery store every single week because I love it. But I know that that is not going to be the most nutrient dense option that's available to me. If I have access to farms or the farmers market, I mean, all of those things are going to have a higher nutrient density. But we crave convenience, and we are very sort of black and white in these mentalities that we have. So we have a hard time kind of finding that middle ground sometimes where it's like, oh, well, it doesn't need to be, organic shipped from California. That's not going to be better than probably what's been conventionally grown close to you.
Yeah. Yeah. So talk to me because there's right a big barrier I see is the people who, for whatever reason, whether it was their doctor, them reading on the internet, their nutritionist, doesn't matter, that they were told, let's just use examples here. Like I need to be low FODMAP, right? And they think this is like a forever thing. Need to be low FODMAP. Maybe they're vegan. Maybe they have a sensitivity to like salicylates. I don't know, this whole shebang of things. And then they come to see you as a nutritionist, right? What is a good starting point around both mentality, behavior, and getting like just basics of nutrition into them because they're excluding so much, right? Especially when that comes down to like healthy foods, quote
Oh
unquote.
my gosh. Yeah, I think we see a lot of people. So I work in two different locations, and in one place, I mean, everyone who's coming is super restricted, and so a lot of what I'm doing is trying to help them expand. And I try to think of things like as a drop in a bucket. I sometimes will use that mentality where if you're underslept and you're super stressed and you're skipping meals and the meals you are getting are just really limited and they're super low FODMAP or what have you, it's like if you try to put like one supplement in there, that's like a drop in the bucket. everything else that is going kind of haywire is going to overwhelm any benefits of taking even, like athletic greens even, or a multivitamin or something. It's just one piece, and it's not like one piece is more important than any other necessarily. So I try to restructure it a little bit. A lot of times people will like super hone in on low FODMAP for SIBO or IBS, and it's like, well, how's your stress?
Yeah.
Do you actually sleep at night?
Mhm.
Are we trying to focus on something that we feel like we have control over? Because that's sort of how we've been raised. And especially with the diet culture that we've all grown up with, we're like, oh, I have control over this, so I can just remove these foods and I'll feel better. But after a couple of months of that, you're probably going to end up feeling worse all over again, because now you've starved your microbiome of your large intestine. And so I do use low FODMAP, but in a very specific way. I always tell people this is an elimination reintroduction process.
Yep.
I mean, I've definitely had people come to me being on the low FODMAP diet for like 4 years. And I'm like, well, I'm a little mad at your doctor, you know?
Or nutritionists. There's a lot
Yeah.
doing that out there, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that people do come in and they're so restricted. Can you just dive into, for everyone listening? So the concept of removing microbiome beneficials, right? And you're starving things out a little bit, like elaborate on that and how that affects total body health and how you tolerate foods and different things, because there's such a miscommunication and misunderstanding, I think, out there, right? You'll get a patient like, I can't have any of that, I respond, and then they just keep restricting. And how does that affect the whole body and kind of future progress of introductions of foods?
I think that, yeah, that's so important for people to at least get some understanding of, because the thing is, with a low FODMAP diet, essentially you're managing symptoms, right? And so when you remove these foods, you're no longer feeding the bacteria in the small intestine, or you're giving them less food. And so you don't have the symptoms that they cause, the bloating, the gas, the diarrhea, the constipation, whatever it is that you're experiencing. But over time, you're also not feeding the bacteria that live in the colon. And we really want to be feeding the bacteria that live in the colon. The entire digestive tract is working together. So if we are only focusing on one part, if all we do is focus on the stomach, or all we do is focus on the small intestine, there's a chance that we're going to allow something else to get out of balance. And then we have to kind of continue to chase these symptoms and chase where this sort of imbalance has come from, this compensation. And then you're like, oh, well, great, your SIBO's gone, but you still have the same symptoms because now your colon is totally out of balance. And there are some people who, you've probably seen this as well, as much as I want to always, do the right thing with SIBO and just get rid of it and move on. And sometimes I don't even touch the SIBO when it's there. I'm like, we cannot do any of these practices that you would use to touch SIBO, because your body's not strong enough. Your gut microbiome's not strong enough. Your digestive capacity is not strong enough to withstand this. We're just going to do more damage. So we need to start from another perspective, another sort of approach. And that may be, with stool testing or stomach support, but it may also be body work or acupuncture, stress management. It depends on the person and what got them there in the first place. But if we're not consuming the fiber that feeds the bacteria that live in the colon, just period, if we're not doing that, then we will end up having gut related issues.
Yeah. Absolutely. Right. So, and do you think when people come to see you that are so restricted and they start to, do you start really with like their mindset about things more? If, let's say they come, they're like, I have a FODMAP issue, a salicylate issue. I can't chew protein. I can't do this. So they're like living on set, but they're so hyper focused on you figuring out what the food sensitivities are, right? Do you see that a lot? They're so focused on being like, what should I do because of these foods? But it's so interesting as a nutritionist, I'm always like, it's not the food, right? It's right. At the end of the time, like there might be, right, an issue. The food is a symptom of the greater, deeper issue, right? So it's like, how do you articulate to your patients, your clients, like that is not the problem, most likely, right? Let's focus on your stress that you don't want me to tell you is the problem.
Right. Yeah. And that's the tricky part, is that you may want to focus on mindset. And I do try to focus on mindset and behaviors. And there are some people who will respond really well to that, and other people who are like, wait, if you're telling me that stress is the problem, it sounds like you're telling me it's my fault and I've done this to myself. And people, we all, I think, get wrapped up in that, especially after, if you've been through the ringer in conventional medicine, of course, you're constantly told that things are your fault or it's all in your head. But stress isn't all in your head. And sometimes it's a matter of just calming the nervous system with these other practices so that you can actually have resilience for stress. So I try to kind of put it in that sort of framework, I guess, where yes, we're all exposed to all of these stressors and some of us respond differently than others, but we can do something about it, and it doesn't always have to be that take 2 hours out of your day every day to meditate. That's not always going to be the answer. I mean, sometimes you may be overdoing it and we may be able to bring something like that in, but I do try to bring that up. I don't always talk about it in the first appointment. I will say sometimes that is more of a second appointment thing, depending on the vibe I'm getting from them, just because it's a weird thing to start talking about with a nutritionist or a functional provider when you're like, I didn't, expect this to turn into a therapy session or something. And I'm not a therapist. I certainly don't want it to turn into that either. But I will ask things like, is this something you've talked about with your therapist to have, if they're seeing one, right? Are these things that you've considered? Have you taken time to reflect, or even just between now and our next appointment, reflect on how stressed you feel
Yeah.
day by day, how overwhelmed you feel, how often do you feel calm, how often do you feel like you're at peace. And sometimes when you look at it that way and they're like, I haven't felt like I'm at peace my entire life. And it's like, okay, so unfortunately you're under stress, your body's under stress, your nervous system is under stress, let's figure this out.
Yeah. My number one referral to anyone is always a psychologist. Just
Yeah.
always before a doctor, before body work, anything. My number one referral for years has always been a therapist, even if it's
Yeah.
change, like rather than talk therapy. I work closely with a local psychologist for many years that we just work on like this kind of getting out of our own way, and whether it's stress around food, meal planning, any of it, chronic disease. It's so helpful. It's crazy. We all need it. We all need somebody to help us get out of our own way, sadly.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and that's not to say that like your symptoms maybe were still caused by an episode
Oh,
of food poisoning, right? And of course, that's there and that's a real thing that's happening, but the mental piece and getting out of our own way, that is also a real thing that's happening. And I think we still haven't fully embraced the fact that, the things that happen in our head are still real,
yeah.
you know?
Yeah. Well,
So
they're short-lived, right? We think that like perpetual thoughts, no one thinks about it, but it's like if you're the person that every night, I'm sort of digressing, but like goes to sleep and thinks about all the horrendous things that could be happening to them or their family, like the next day that are probably unrealistic, that is perpetual bad thoughts that are going to affect your physiology. And overnight, they're going to affect your gut. They're going to affect everything, hormone levels, sleep, obviously, which affects everything. So it's like, we don't think about it because it's such a short-lived fleeting moment, but it adds up over time, right? It's not that I almost got in a car accident and that stressed me out for a second. It's the thought about the car accident for the next 3 months can affect our physiology over time, which is really hard to undo. And it's sort of just more of, it exacerbates everything else going on, right? It can be a cause, but exacerbates the gut health, which is what you're focusing on with the practitioner, that you're trying to seek them out for. So it needs to be addressed.
Yeah, and I think that sort of ties into behavior and behavioral change anyway. The more of those things that you have built up that are, whether they're your insecurities or your traumas or, your ACE score from growing up, your socioeconomic status, racism, sexism, all of these different things, they stack up and they impact your health like across the board. And especially your gut health, there's sort of that PTSD of the gut that also exists that we kind of have to find a way to address. I worked at a mental health clinic for 2 years. And so all of my clients who came to me through there, they all had to have a therapist, right? And it was really helpful to know that they were much, they're open to it. They're open to those conversations. But outside of that, yeah, a lot of times it's like, all right, can we talk about stress a little bit,
Yeah.
maybe?
I think
What
she's
you've been through?
at discuss. I mean, some are not, but they're pretty open about it. But there is truly, like you're saying, kind of a PTSD situation around the gut. Like everything, every time they try to expand or add a new supplement, it triggers it. And then they think, right, then it becomes more restrictive and going back to their comfort zone, which isn't always the most healthful approach or way to get healed or on that healing journey. Right. So I expect.
Yeah. And I think with the restriction, there's also that other element that comes in. If you're restricting your diet and you feel restricted,
Mhm.
then when it's time to expand, you're a kid in a candy shop. You are not, and you're going to have a much harder time expanding slowly and
Yeah.
appropriately. So when you have that mindset in the beginning, that like, we're going to add this food back in, we're not taking this away forever, we're going to eat onions and we're going to eat garlic, it's just going to be for a couple more weeks that we're not going to have those things. So that's one of the things, the way that I use the low FODMAP diet, for example, if I can, when I'm using it with people, is really starting with like elimination, 2 to 4 weeks, something like that. And then a really systematic reintroduction. That's slow and a little bit annoying, but the idea is that at the end of the reintroduction, you know what bothers you and what doesn't, and you know the serving size. Because that's the thing with FODMAPs. People like completely avoid them and like teetotal on FODMAPs. And it's like, actually, you can probably have some amount, even if it's 3 pieces of broccoli. I would love it if you could have 3 pieces of broccoli every day. That's amazing to me for someone who's been that restricted. And so it's really just kind of systematically figuring out what your serving size is. And so maybe you can't have a whole raw broccoli salad with red onions in it and a garlicky dressing, but if you can have some version of all of those things, you're going to be doing huge favors for your gut.
Yeah.
That's a huge expansion that you're having. And I've had people come to me literally eating 4 foods for years. And it's like, we have to do something about this, even if it's 1 piece of broccoli, even if it's a half a teaspoon of mashed carrots. Let's just start there.
Yeah. This isn't a SIBO talk for anyone listening, but it's a really hot topic. So just for everyone, as they're listening to it and they keep hearing FODMAP and all of that, tell my peoples what is the difference. So, right, when you hear the word microbiome, which is like the right gut health hot topic, it's all important, obviously, to us as providers that like work on the gut, but we're usually referring to your colon, to your large intestine, not your small intestine. So people are saying, well, I need to kill it all off. My practitioner told me it shouldn't be there. Not all bacteria, right? Like the large intestine should be housing trillions and trillions of bacteria, yeast, parasites, all these things are relatively common and normal. It's more that she's talking and referring to if you have a small intestinal bacterial overgrowth issue, that's where those foods might be triggering you. Definitely work with someone if you are struggling with that. But
absolutely.
that is one, because it is a misconception, can't speak, misconception to the world of like where this bacteria should be housing and what that problem really is, right? We think it's bad. It's always bad. It's always this. It's just bacteria in the wrong place. And it's a symptom of things going on a deeper level. Like she's talking about, right? Stress. Is stress a part of that for you? Is restriction of foods a part of that for you, worsening your microbiome, which is causing you to have these constipation, right? Which can be a contributor to SIBO. So I just want to preface, so people are like, what is this FOD? Should I be on this FODMAP?
Oh yeah.
Don't be on the FODMAP diet. I almost never do it anymore with people unless they're super symptomatic and super ill and just can't tolerate food, because I have just found over the years, it's caused more issues than are worth. You can heal it. You can do it without that diet, without that restrict. Like maybe you have to pay attention to 1 or 2 foods or the portions and things, but to have to be on that plan long-term, I've just found is not always necessary, which is, I think, a revelation for me and my patients.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I mean, when I started, it was like, oh, you have SIBO. Okay. All we're going to do is focus on how to get you on the low FODMAP diet while while we figure out how we're going to get rid of this. And now it's like, it's if we use it, it's going to be so much shorter. And that's really what sort of a therapeutic diet should be. You may have some sort of sensitivity, if you're lactose intolerant, or you really can't have gluten. And I think gluten is the main one that if people are having issues, they may need to remove it for the long term.
Yeah.
But a lot of times these things are really short term. I think about how keto got started, and it was really to change the biochemistry of the body to impact the nervous system and the neurological functioning of these patients with epilepsy. And I think that we take this data and we just completely skew it and use it to our advantage. And I think that a lot of times, you can feel a lot better when you change your diet. I mean, I think that's why we're nutritionists, right? That makes a difference. But most people, most of our colleagues, like these days that I talk to, especially in functional medicine, are like, yes, but the goal really is to have a variety of foods. We're trying to eat the rainbow. We're trying to eat as many foods as we can tolerate and as work with us in our body. So
Funny, I experienced the opposite.
well,
the opposite of this in our field, which is sort of a
that's probably true too.
A disadvantage is I sometimes feel, Kira, who works for me, we always talk about, we feel a little bit like we're in like our own little world at times in the functional world, because I'm a certified and, very trained functional medicine provider, but I don't always see, I love the functional people I meet that are like that, and that are like, a glass of wine's okay. You know what I mean? Like out and enjoying your community and your culture. And like, we're at a restaurant and experiencing food. Like I have very vivid memories of being with certain very well-known like practitioners that I watch what they're eating when we go to restaurants. I do. And I'm like, did they take the piece of bread? Did they, you know what I mean? Did they have, or were they restrictive? Because that tells me sadly a lot about how they're interacting with patients. And I experience, and maybe they have their own health issues, so I don't want to like include everyone into that. But and then I get a lot of practitioners who are like, nobody should have gluten, nobody should have dairy. And I just don't think it's that black and white. And I just feel like that's where I might start a war here, but like a differentiation of a well-trained nutritionist or dietitian in the functional space comes in versus people who don't have the training and experience in food, because food is more than food. Food is about culture. It's about community. It's about what are the people, which is a question I have for you, but like, what are the people in your households allergic to or sensitive to? Is there a cultural or religious belief? Like there's so many things that get intertwined to just be told by my doctor, you can't have gluten, you have to be low FODMAP, and maybe you have to also be vegan, and like go see the nutritionist and she'll plan. And it's like, that's so detrimental in my opinion to the where you get more person.
And I think it's this thing I talk about probably more often than I should, but it's this dogma mentality that people really latch onto, and they're like super dogmatic about whatever the rules are that either worked for them maybe, or that they learned from some of their teachers who they respected, or whatever it is. And that's that inflexibleness where they're like, no, these are the rules and I'm going to stick to it. And it's like, I don't think you have to really. It's a little much. To just flat out constantly say things like that, like, oh, everyone needs to be gluten-free or everyone needs to be dairy-free. It's like, well, you're really ignoring probably 40% of the population who this makes up the majority of their diets, and they probably tolerate it just fine,
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot more to it than just that, of course.
I think so. Social media is great, right? Like Instagram is great. It's a lot of free resources. Like just think of you and I, like you put out tons of food resources and recipes and ways to cook, and like, even have like, how can we be the least expensive we can to get a really healthful, well-plated meal to somebody? And I feel like I put out a lot of clinical information for free. But if you're following people that don't align with where you should be in life or your beliefs, or you're following somebody that just is restrictive, right? They're like preaching a restrictive plan, or they're all keto, or they're all paleo, or something like that. It doesn't matter what the diet is. It's not good. It's not right. It's like, unfollow those people, in my opinion, because the social media world has done us dirty, in my opinion, on this. Is we follow people and they talk about how horrible gluten is and all this, but it's like, do you need to be gluten-free? Have you worked with a professional that can do some testing or do some, just diving in on your diet and physiology for you, because
Mm-hmm.
I do find there's so many people, they'll be like, I follow blah, blah, blah. And they say this, like, what do you believe about that? And I'm like, well, do you have this going on in your life? And they're like, no, but I feel like I need to be restrictive like this. And I'm like, it's doing people a disservice, in my opinion, the free information. I don't know how you feel
Mm-hmm.
about
I agree completely. I think that it's because it's whatever worked for that person, and that's fine. And that's great if that's what worked for them. But if what used to happen is that people would have these unique conditions and they would talk about what they were doing about them on YouTube, and they would have like 5 followers and it would all be people who had the same condition, and they would follow along and often would feel better, right? But now we're just consuming all of this content from people who have a wide variety of differences, and we're like, oh, well, this person has SIBO and this person has Candida and this person has Hashimoto's and this person has mold. And so I'm just going to combine all of their recommendations, even though I have none of those things and I'm perfectly healthy.
Yeah. Isn't it?
It's wild. It's really wild.
Professionals aren't an excuse of that. Like, right, they are following too and being like, should I be doing XYZ?
Yeah.
Like, they
Yeah.
know better too. And it's there. Like, right, clickbait. You just click on it, you see it. They do a good job at marketing whatever they believe in to kind of see them. And it's not always beneficial. I do see a lot of, downfalls of the Instagram world.
Well, and I think this goes back to kind of what you were talking about at the beginning is, people just trying to live the best life that they can live while on a budget and getting sucked into these traps. I had someone come to me once who had similar issues of just like being exposed to things on social media, and she had diabetes. She was pre-diabetic. She was almost diabetic for type 2. And she came to me and she was juicing,
Yeah.
mostly fruit, for like the whole first half of the day. And I was like, I'm so sorry, but who told you to do this? Because that is not making your pre-diabetes situation any better.
Mm-hmm.
And she was, she had like lost some weight on that and stuff too. So she thought she was really going in the right direction. And I was like, hey, I'm so sorry, but we really should probably tweak this a little bit. But she's like, oh, but this person does it and I'm following them and doing their recipes. I follow these YouTubers and stuff. And I'm like, do they have diabetes?
Yeah.
She's like, well, no. Like, okay, so
Like, not.
so it's not for you. We need to personalize this a little bit. And her numbers stabilized in like 3 months
Yeah.
once we were able to adjust that.
Yeah. Yeah. Don't always follow, get a better professional, personalized opinion. So with the affordability aspect and seeking out like locally and all of that, what do you do with your patients that, because this is common, right? Like, let's say I have 3 children. One has a peanut allergy, one hates all foods. One, you know what I mean? Like, one won't eat anything, one's a really good eater. And my husband doesn't cook, won't go grocery shopping. Like, how do you work in that concept? But yet they need maybe a very specific, well-versed diet. Where's your starting point for people or your advice? Because it's so common, right? That you see what might fit, but it's like, there is no way that is fitting into that person's lifestyle.
I think that does happen, and that can be really tricky. And it kind of goes back to what you were talking about before, where sometimes we may want to try to work on things that aren't food related and see what we can do and how we can manage things. Sometimes, it's a matter of like, okay, what can we outsource, right? If it's like, all right, you need to eat this certain way to feel your best. This is going to be something that will help you for the next several weeks or months. So financially, if it's available to you, can you outsource that? Can you use a meal service, or can you have someone help with the cooking and you can pay them for a few days a week? I think that we sometimes forget that that is an option, right? You can't outsource time with your kids, but there are other things that you may be able to outsource. So sometimes I think that can help. Sometimes just getting really simple.
Mm-hmm.
When there are allergies, you do want to be really, really careful. Like I had a client, for example, with celiac, and she was like baking with her kids with regular gluten containing flour. And her husband was bringing bread home all the time for dinner. And I was like, this is a situation where I think it's really important for you to have a completely gluten-free home. And you got to talk to your family and you have to make this transition. And sometimes they can and sometimes they can't. And I think that, it's important to do so, but sometimes it's just not in your wheelhouse. I also had someone who got diagnosed with celiac disease almost 10 years before she gave up gluten
Mm.
because she was a new young mom. She had like a little kid and just had given birth. And she was like, I have no idea how to be gluten free. And this is, 10 or 15 years ago at this point. And so, yes, your health is going to improve as soon as you're able to do that. But sometimes you have to ease into it. Sometimes you have to just try and find other ways and focus on other things that maybe aren't food. So, are there other things that you can do to help improve your health? Maybe you can't make yourself a salad, with lots of different colors in it several times a week, but you can go for a walk with your kids
Yeah.
and be outside for an hour every day. Try to, you know, balance all of those things. They say you can't outrun a bad diet, right? Have you heard that before? Well, I mean, you can't out eat a sedentary lifestyle. You can't out eat a super stressful lifestyle. All of these pillars matter. So sometimes it's a matter of kind of looking at it from that perspective. With other things like picky kids or picky family members, I think, I really like Ellen Satter, the Ellen Satter method, which is basically that, you don't pressure your kids, you continually provide exposures to them and do it in a way that you're not wasting food, right? You don't fill their plate up with food they've never had or they're not interested in eating, but you at least make it available on the table so they see it. The
Mhm.
more often that they see it, the better they're going to feel about it
Mhm.
and the more comfortable that it's going to be for them. And you can do that with adults. You've got a super picky, stubborn partner who's not really interested in trying other foods. Well, prepare those foods and have them.
Yeah.
And you can serve things on the side or separately, so you're not like forcing someone to try and eat the way you want to eat. But I think that there, with a little tweaking, there are some ways to work with that depending on what your situation is.
Yeah. I also find it helpful. I think a few tips from my end that I would recommend is, so one, first of all, figure out whether it's with your family, with your nutritionist, like where your baseline is. So if somebody's saying you need to be gluten free, you need to be here are some recipes. If you don't know how to cook, even
Yeah.
be a great cook, but if you don't know how to cook, why don't we start with finding like a local or online cooking class or have someone come over and teach you? Because if you can't, right, that's like trying to ride a bike, but you didn't even start with the training wheels. Like, let's get going, figure out how to do that portion, because there's plenty of people you'll find they're like, oh, well, how do I bake the chicken? I'm like, well, first of all, you could Google it, but second of all, let's figure that skill out first, or like warm the skill. I also find it really helpful if you are inclusive to your family. So if you are working with a practitioner, let's say you're working with somebody and you're telling them to go low FODMAP. We'll just keep on that example, which is super overwhelming. And then that person who's never heard of low FODMAP is trying to articulate it to their partner who does all the cooking, right? That
Mm.
is very overwhelming. And that person, it's just going to cause chaos in the household. So whether it's the practitioner or the patient inviting their spouse, their partner to come to their appointment, right? Or so that they can actually hear from the practitioner what is expected, what is being recommended, I think is really powerful, because I think when you leave it up to somebody who has no professional experience in that field, it's overwhelming, right? Like trying to take what you're telling them and tell their partner, this is what I need. Invite them to the appointment. Or the whole family, doesn't even matter, right? Like get some experience and exposure there. And then like lastly, I would say the biggest thing, find the commonalities of what's working between what you're being told to do and what your family is open to, and start. People don't do this. It's so helpful. Start with a grocery list. It could be so basic.
Mm.
It'd be like, like cucumbers, right? Like, what are the meals, soups? Like, go on Caitlin's Instagram, find some things that you all think look good and you would try. You can make exceptions in the food, and then go grocery shopping when you get home. Spend literally 20 minutes just like washing, cutting up some of the produce, right? Like organizing it, coming up with the meals, because otherwise the week is going to be really hard and take a toll on everyone. So I have a patient and they're adults, but like they don't do the cooking. Their spouse does the cooking, but
Mhm.
they're the ones needing to change the diet, but they're also a picky eater, right? It's like, how do we have that communication with things like you and I are coming up with that you're willing to expand on and try? Talk to the spouse doing the grocery shopping, because if they don't know you need those products, it's going to be really hard to implement it, right? So it has to be, sadly, like a whole family on board.
Yeah. And it depends on the relationship that these individuals have. Sometimes it's like maybe a couples therapist would help you because there's some communication here that you can only benefit from some assistance there. And even sometimes what I'll recommend is if you are going to follow something that is free of, I don't know, potatoes, right? Okay, so let's get you like an AIP cookbook because it's going to be free of potatoes, and then have the family look through
Yep.
what in that cookbook sounds good and what can we make here. And of course you can adjust and add things. I'll often have people, if they're not doing well with grains or something, it's like, well, just go buy a paleo cookbook,
Yeah.
and you can still add other foods in that you're tolerating that may not be included on the paleo diet. I'm not recommending that, but then you've got a cookbook and it's a template, and you
Yeah.
can kind of pick things from there.
You put a lot of free recipes up, right? For people to.
Yeah, so my food blog. Yeah.
I mean, or not everyone. Yeah, they always look so good. You're doing great with it.
Oh,
Yeah. So if like,
thank you.
coach, so follow her on Instagram at Frugal Nutrition, and you can get some ideas and head to our website and all of that in the blog. But it is simple, sadly, simple things we don't. I hear it every day. Once you start to dig deeper with patients that you might think it's such just like clinical mess, it's like you find out the partner's not supportive, or their family's not supportive of what they're trying to do. And it's like, this is a deeper problem than me saying this therapeutic diet will solve everything. It's like, no, it won't. It might,
Mhm.
but it's like, let's start with the communication in the family, the support. Like, is it just having a sit down talk through? Does your spouse need to become a patient of mine too? And like, let's talk about that, because that's often the case too. Sadly, it's like I always find there's like a couple people. It's hard, right? Behavior change is hard. Health is hard. And if that person isn't necessarily like having horrible, symptoms and things, they don't necessarily want to work on it quite yet. It takes sometimes people getting sicker to want to work on things. So it's just a bigger conversation. But I think all of that's so relevant to kind of like going back to the beginning of the conversation is what is health? What does that mean? Where's that starting point for you? It might not be these diets. It might not even be food. It might be the communication or the talk around the food in the household, or who's doing the shopping, who's doing the cooking, like come up with a little bit of a better game plan in the house. Cause I know my house, we don't eat healthy if no one, especially now with like a new baby, if we don't have like a set kind of structure to, these are the meals we think we'd all enjoy this week. Like, what are the ingredients we probably need to get? Who's going to get them? Who's going to cook? All of that. Because it's hard. It's really hard when you have a family to do.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so funny you say that. I mean, just with me and my husband, today I added a calendar event to the calendar for tomorrow night that says Zach is cooking. And then I said, I bought these ingredients. Here are some recipes you could make with these ingredients. Do whatever you want. And sure, most people don't need to do that amount of work, but like obviously I
Probably
work in, well, maybe. Yeah. I mean, I work in food. So yeah.
that might be harder for people who aren't nutritionists, but it's true. We do it all the time, and like, and taking different control of what's going on. But it's like, if all of a sudden 12:30 hits and we're all working and about to eat lunch and no one has communicated like what we're having or options of having or who's cooking it, it's like, it's just a crapshoot. So we're like,
Yeah.
what can we go get? What can we? And it's not always the healthiest option because that takes work.
It
Usually.
just becomes chaos. You're
Yeah.
like, if you wait too long to eat. And that's another thing I feel like sometimes just building in a little bit of structure, and for some people having a bigger breakfast, if it's like your day gets ahead of you and gets crazy, well, let's not try to chase hunger all day. Let's maybe have a little bit of a bigger breakfast.
Yeah.
And then we're not, starving at 10:30
Yeah.
and all we have are vending machine snacks or whatnot.
Yeah. And I
Which
mean,
also happens.
like, right, we hear a lot, there's a big population that believes you shouldn't snack, right? You should have like 3 or 4 meals spaced out, even if you're talking about that gut health component. But have healthy snacks on hand, and they don't need to be fancy. Like, just have some nuts in hand that are a good balance of like fat and protein, because if you do wait too long, things kind of derail in the household. It's like your life isn't going to derail because you ate a snack, right?
Mm-hmm.
Eat a snack.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
We go to my pantry, there's a million of them. So yeah. And so are there any things with people that you recommend to make their life easier outside of these tips that we gave, that like they could have a kitchen appliance, or they could have a process in their house that you've just found maybe up front is more costly, but like saves them a ton of time, money, all of that going forward, since you do all that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a few things like in terms of, well, in terms of food, like don't be afraid of frozen veggies, for
Mhm.
example. A lot of people really think those are a problem, but really, I mean, those are great to have on hand, and it makes things easier when it's like, I know that I feel better if I have vegetables with my meal, and so I'm just going to have some frozen and
Mhm.
on hand. That can always help. They last forever. I also think that there are a few simple kitchen things that you should maybe get a better quality version of. Like, of course, everyone talks about knives. Getting like one good knife can really make a difference, because if you're trying to like smash a dull knife into a bell pepper, of course, cooking is going to be frustrating and take forever. But when you have some basic equipment that you enjoy or that's good quality, like a good cutting board, good knives, I really recommend getting pans that can also go in the oven. So it simplifies things. I love a cast iron. I think that's amazing. And you don't have to like scrub it out every time you use it. So that's kind of nice. And then I don't think you need to have all these fancy gadgets. Like one of the best gadgets that I ever got, I actually got at a secondhand store for $40 when we lived in Japan, but it's a US based company. I think it's the Ninja company, but they have this kitchen prep thing that's just a blender and like a blender base and then a food processor base, and they still make it. I have my clients buy it all the time. It's like between $35 and $50 depending on where you look. And so you've got like a mini food processor slash food chopper and a blender. And they're not, high powered,
Yeah.
like super high powered or anything, but it makes such a difference. Just if you're like, I'm going to make a sauce, I'm going to make a dressing, I want to chop the onions in here, you're going to make meatballs and you don't have to mince every single thing up. I think that, and those are cheap, right? And they work.
Let's say a mandolin
So
is helpful too. If people don't know, Google what a mandolin is, but that's like an inexpensive thing that you can change for just quickly chop. If you're like gonna do what I was saying with like the fruit prep once a week and getting all the fruits,
yeah.
you can just have it all done very, very easily. I don't like to use
Well,
like my husband does.
yeah, they're a little scary, but there are those mandolins that have the different blades that you can change out.
Mhm.
So yeah, those I think can also be really versatile, and just, get one of those mandolin gloves
Yeah.
so that you don't slice your finger.
Good knife, you could do that. Good knives are great, but oh my God. But I do find that because I was just actually somewhere recently and the knife was super not sharp. And I was trying to
Yeah.
I think like avocado toast for everyone or something. And I was like, this is brutal and I'm having zero fun. Like I'm not doing this again tomorrow. And I was like,
Yeah.
at home we have such good knife and it makes everything a breeze and more enjoyable. It's just like it becomes more of like an art and happiness than I'm cooking and trying to put
Hmm.
it together. So I
Hmm.
absolutely agree with that. And I don't think there's anything too fancy. I mean, also one thing I think people very much underutilize is like whether it's a crock pot, even on this or slow cooker or something, and like cooking like soups and stews. I think especially for people who have like gut health problems, who's obviously my whole population, it's so underutilized. Like people think they have to keep reinventing the wheel and recooking things and not use leftovers. And it's like, oh my God, our lives are so much easier here when we're like, what soup are we cooking on Monday and having it through Thursday? You know what I mean? And then we'll be sick of it. Even if you're sick of it, freeze it. You know what I mean? And then
Hmm.
have it another week later and you can have it and rotate. So, chilies, soups, it doesn't matter. Stews are so easy. You don't need to be a good cook. You can find a recipe, you just throw it all into a dish. You know what I mean? And then you can have it as like a whole hearty meal every single day for days and rotate it. So I do think that is very underused for people and recommendation.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people do get sick of those things also. It's just some people do and some people don't. But I always say, like, just do one thing differently then, top it today, whatever that soup is, you're gonna maybe top it with like whatever parsley and lemon.
Yeah.
And then tomorrow you eat it with tortilla chips. And then the next day you put some sour cream or yogurt on there or something, just like
A
make it
different,
a little bit different.
so you're not feeling like you're
Put some hot sauce on it,
hot sauce and everything. That's my rap.
right?
Is there anything else I'm missing that is a helpful tip for people who are trying to, where do I start? Where do I change my lifestyle? How do I conquer these crazy nutrition, diet world that I'm experiencing, whether it's with a provider or social media.
Yeah, I think that the first thing is probably kind of going back to what you said about just learning to cook, and whatever that is, whatever that means to you, just getting in the kitchen a little bit. There are all these amazing YouTube channels that I love. You can just pick up little tips here and there, and then you have to practice it though. So, actually learning to cook and practicing, whether it's a cooking class or a YouTube video, is probably one of the biggest things that you can do for your health.
Mhm.
But then, even aside from the nutrition piece, these other things that play a role, sometimes it's like, maybe you just need to go to bed 20 minutes earlier a couple nights a week. Like maybe you just make Monday night the 9 p.m. bedtime night. That's it. You don't have to do it every single day. I know you want to build in time to do other things, especially if you have kids. But I would say that's probably the other thing that I would bring up with, like, just overall health. And then one that I think is also challenging for some people, but really, really, really just mind-blowingly useful, is like slowing down at mealtime and chewing your food. Just chew your food.
Yeah.
And if you can't always chew your food because you've got 3 crazy kids, so pick a meal, 1 meal per day, and you're gonna sit with that food and you're gonna chew it really well.
Yeah.
I mean, in the gut health space, it's huge.
I know. It's fascinating. I mean, obviously, it's so sad. It can come back to the simplicity of like, we're just stressed and not chewing well, and large food chunks are making it to the intestinal tract and causing a feeding frenzy for bacteria and yeast. But you'd be fascinated when you have like a baby, or imagine 3 of them. And trying to, like, you can cook a meal, you could get healthier food, but like chewing it, it's just crazy. You are like standing and eating and just trying to feed yourself to move on with the day. And it's something I
Yeah.
have had like a realization about. And it's just that's a whole other population. I have to someone come on and talk about like
Yeah.
good and trying to take care of yourself, because it's really hard. Right? You don't sleep, you can't eat. You're lucky if you can like cook wholesome meals and get to a store. But that's
Mhm.
where tips of like, you know, make an activity where you go take your child. I mean, if your baby likes to be walked in a stroller or anything, like go to the farmer's market, walk around, get some local produce, like find way. And a lot of those places have local ingredients that are used and already kind of pre-made into like, whether it's a veggie
Mhm.
burger or a salad, and you can get that ready to go. But it's really hard. And I feel for those people now.
Well,
It's
you are those people now.
the people, because holy crow, I do it. And I'm like standing over like Thanksgiving dinner, just trying to like shovel it in while not even paying attention. You're like, I don't feel great. And it's like, I wonder why.
Mm.
You're not sleeping, you're not moving, you're not doing anything. But yeah, so like having a little, grace for yourself and compassion for yourself is very helpful as you're trying to take on these endeavors, because we're making it sound like it is easy and right, like chew better, like make your food, all this stuff, or like,
Mhm.
but it's not always easy. And that's kind of the point, is find where you and your loved ones can start, and like ask for help when you need help.
Ask for help.
That's such
Yeah.
a big, like ask your friends, your family to bring a dish or to do whatever, or like use, online shopping if you need to one week, just so you can have healthy groceries in the house, or ask your spouse or partner or your kids to help you with things and like chopping up some stuff, or like making a meal, make it a family activity, because that will get them a little bit more invested too into what you're trying to do for you and them at home. So it's really hard. We feel you guys. But yeah, I definitely, where can our listeners find you and find this food blog?
Yeah, thank you. So, frugalnutrition.com is my food blog and my main website. I'm also at Frugal Nutrition on Instagram. And then I do have a nutrition website that is more like just a contact sort of page. It's caitlinselfnutrition.com.
Yeah. When are you going to start your YouTube channel?
It's so funny that you just asked me
Sorry.
that. I was
I'm like, where's this YouTube channel? I need it.
I know, I've been thinking about it.
Yeah.
YouTube has everything.
You should, because right? Like there's not that many people, there's a handful, but that are well versed both in, the diet, the nutritional part, as well as how we can implement things, but also the cooking part. That is a cool pairing that we don't see often. So I will look out for your YouTube channel so I can and everyone can start to learn to cook, right? Because if you can even start with that, like we can put a recipe and say it's so easy, but like it isn't always so easy. Seeing you do it would be amazing, I think. So I'm supportive.
Yeah, I
I'm,
appreciate that.
I'm
Yeah.
frugal nutrition YouTube. So I will be sharing when it comes up. But this was so helpful. I hope people get a little bit inspired and also realize maybe working with a nutritionist, if you are given one of these, daunting, overwhelming diet plans or nutrition plans, like maybe it isn't what you need. Maybe you need support. So it can be, it's not always breaking the bank to see somebody, right? Like it might improve your income long term if you can see somebody a few times to get a little bit of support with this on the back end, so you're not struggling for years trying to figure it out on your own, or maybe with a physician or somebody who doesn't have that nutrition and cooking training. So definitely seek somebody out. Reach out to myself or Caitlin if you need to find somebody, but ifm.org is also a good place where you can find people that are experienced, whether they're nutritionists, have more experience in that food, that cooking, because you take a lot of those courses and information to heart when you're learning about what might benefit somebody's physiology, right? So, and I'm sure there's plenty of other options there too. But thank you for coming on. I'm excited for your next steps and ventures, especially on your new life of travel. I feel like you're going to like all these crazy plans being out there.
Maybe. Thanks. This has been great. Thanks for having me, Katie. I appreciate it. This is fun.
It is
Good to
fun.
see you.
Oh.